Hello, welcome to the Church360 Ledger Transactions, Reports, and Reconciliation webinar. Hi, my name is Rod Kiles, and I am the manager of Concordia Technology Solutions Support. You can reach me one of two ways. You can reach me at rod.kiles@cph.org, and of course you can give me a phone call at 314-268-1315. I kindly ask that you mute your phones and or microphones and post any questions you may have into the question window. That will be located on the right-hand side of your screen, and there'll be a little orange button at the top, an orange arrow that you can click, and that will allow you to open and close the control panel. So if you have any questions along the way, feel free to post those questions. My associate, Jim Bowling, he's been with us over a year now, and he'll be answering any support questions you may have along the way. So you can reach him at jim.bowling@cph.org, and you can also give him a call at 314-268-1315. So these webinars, they all have a very similar form and structure. We start out with the class agenda, so we go over the structure of the webinar. And then after that, we jump into the overview to kind of explain all the topics that we're going to cover. So with the agenda, we're going to go through the overview, go through discussion. We'll have a short 5-minute intermission. And that time is really a chance to give everybody to have a little short break, grab something to drink, step away for a second. So after the intermission, we will reconvene and we'll finish up any material that's left over to be covered. Then from there, we'll have our short quiz. No pressure during the quiz, I promise. So no one's keeping score or anything. We'll just kind of see who answered the questions and correct course at any time at that point. So it may also foster other questions as well. So if there's questions to be answered or questions to be asked, you can post those during the session in the question box on the right-hand side, and you can also ask those at the end of the session in our question and answer session. So let's go ahead and go through our class overview. So this class is going to start out with transactions. So we're going to go through the conventions that there are for transactions. So there's some things that are similar through all the different transaction types. So we're going to cover those. We're also going to talk about debits and credits. In our earlier session, we were talking about, hey, this is a dual entry bookkeeping system, double entry bookkeeping. So, and we'll talk further about how those relate and how your transactions are going to use debits and credits. We'll talk about pending transactions. We'll talk about managing transactions. We'll then transition into reports, and we'll go through all the different reports that are out there. So we'll discuss the general ledger report, discuss the balance sheet report, also discuss the chart of accounts report, and I have balance sheet on there twice. So general ledger, balance sheet, chart of accounts, and there's one other report inside the software. Statement of income and expense. So general ledger, statement of income and expense, chart of accounts, and balance sheet report. So we'll cover all four of those reports. We'll also cover the event log as well. So it can be used, I guess, in some aspects for reporting, but really it's more just to follow up on things that are done inside of the software. So then from there, once we've gone through our reports, we would have verified our transactions, and it'll be time to do a bank account reconciliation. So we'll go through a mock bank account reconciliation. We'll review the event log at that point, and we'll have our quiz and our question and answer session. So at that point, I guess we'll wrap up our day, and I will head home, or we'll hop into some more emails or something like that. So wonderful. So I'm excited, as you can tell. I hope you're excited as well. If you're ready, I'm ready. Let's get started. So we're gonna go one more. We're gonna go through a couple more slides here inside this screen, and then we're actually going to jump over to the software. So this is another session where we actually have a few additional slides. So so we can focus in on the presentation. I'm going to turn off the webcam, and everybody should be able to see transactions on my screen. And we're going to talk about the similarities first. So inside of Church360 Ledger, there's going to be things that are similar about all the transactions. So we're going to mention those up front. Then we're going to talk about, I want to say it's deposits, and then we're going to create a few deposits. So with similarities, every transaction must have a date. So there's not a way to enter a transaction without a date, and that date is going to be when the transaction is applied to your balances. Every transaction has the option of including a descriptive memo, and the memo can just allow you to provide additional information about the transaction. After that, every transaction will have a minimum of 2 line items, and this goes back to our debits and credits. So at a minimum, you have to have those 2 line items. It could be 3, could be 4, could be 10, 20. I don't know how many would be the most that you would put on there, but it has to at least be 2 to balance your debits and credits. And also the debits and credits must balance on all transactions. And let me add in, I'm going to go through a series of transactions, ones that I think people want to see. But if there's a transaction that I don't cover that you want me to cover, post that in the question box there, and I'll make sure to cover that transaction for you. So the examples I have cover most scenarios, but there might be, I guess, kind of like a unique transaction out there that you may want to see done. So just let me know if that's the case. Okay, so after our conventions, there are debits and credits. And even after all of these years, I still keep this chart, not this exact chart, but I still keep this chart on my desk. So what I do is I keep it taped to the bottom of my monitor, and then that allows me to, whenever I'm working with transactions, kind of understand what's going to happen. So in looking at the account types, you'll notice that there's, on the left-hand side, assets, restricted funds, liabilities, income accounts, and expense accounts. And you'll kind of notice that the debits and credits are different when you're going between the different account types. So, and maybe one of the first things you notice over here is that a credit decreases an asset. So when you're working with your bank accounts, I think lots of times, I guess, we think credits are pluses and they add things in, and in some scenarios they do, as you can see over here on the left-hand side. But when you're dealing with the bank, a credit is going to decrease that or decrease your bank account. So debits will increase an asset account, credits will decrease an asset account. And if we go back to the example we've been kind of talking about with deposits, you would debit the bank account, but you would credit the income account. Now, I'm going to give everybody a chance to maybe kind of jot this down if they'd like. It can be found inside of the help system. And for those of you who have been working with, I guess, doing finances, or you might be an accountant, you might already have this memorized and it might just be second nature. For those of us who this is kind of a new thing, we just keep a chart, and then that allows us to kind of understand how these accounts interact. Now, the reason why I'm showing the debits and credits chart so early is to kind of bring better understanding of how transactions work. In most cases, like checks and deposits and transfers, you really won't have to know the credits and the debits. When you're working with journal entries, you definitely need to know the credits and the debits at that point. So it's not critical to know this, but it definitely will help out in certain situations. I do have a note at the bottom. Note the money in a restricted fund is held in an asset account. So that's why these two actually have the same credits and debits, even though they are above and below each other. So okay, so that's the debits and credits chart, and I'll come back to the debits and credits chart here in just a little bit when we're doing our journal entries. So I want to start out with deposits. So usually in my head I think, well, you have to have money before you can spend money, so I like to talk about deposits first. With deposits, deposits allow users to deposit money into an asset account. So whenever our church members, our parishioners, contributors, they give money. You're going to receive the money. Most likely you're going to enter it into a system that tracks how much each person gave and how much was given to a specific fund. So with that said, that's going to track the offerings, but then your treasurer is going to need to record a deposit. And the deposit is going to track how much money was put into the bank, and that deposit is also going to show line items that also represent how much money was received for those purposes. So they allow you to deposit money into an asset account. Examples of deposits are going to be situations where you're depositing the church offerings, where you also, if you receive rental income, you might receive a check for that, and you'll have to take that to the bank. And there are some people who use deposits to record interest on bank accounts. Not everybody does that, but I've spoken to enough people who do that. So I know that's a pattern or a trend for some individuals. So, okay, so then these transactions are limited to assets and income accounts. So the transactions in Church360 Ledger have limits, they have restrictions. And when we're talking about deposits, you can only use assets and income accounts. So, and we'll talk a little bit more about that when we're creating the transaction, but you can only use those two account types. And then in addition, this does integrate with Church360 members. So lots of churches will buy Church360 members, and they'll also buy Church360 Ledger. And one of the benefits of having the two products together is the offering batches are handed over from Church360 members to Church360 Ledger. And then that allows you to quickly create a deposit. So it kind of saves you a little bit of time right there. So why don't we switch screens, and we're going to go to, we're going to go here, and we're going to go to Church360 Ledger. So I'm going to rearrange those tabs and close that one. So inside of Church360 Ledger, when you log in, you're going to land here on the home screen, and sometimes I'll call it the transactions view because you'll see all of these line items down here on the bottom of the screen. And these are going to show all of your assets and liabilities. So at the start of the session earlier this morning, I imported our Shepherd staff data into First Community Church, and it's showing all of the transactions that were imported. So to enter in a deposit, there's going to be one of two ways of doing it. So sometimes people are going to go into new transaction, and then they're going to go to deposit. Oh, let me see. Hello, Julie. And I can zoom in. So let's see, control, let's see. How about 125? That looks pretty good here, and I think it still allows me to show the information. Okay, so inside of here, I can go to new transaction, and then at that point, I can go to deposit, and maybe we'll try 150. Okay, so deposit, and then when we're inside of this window, this is where you would enter in your deposit. So I'm going to show manually entering a deposit first, and then I'm going to go into Church360, enter in a couple offerings, and show that handoff between the two products. So let's say that these are Sunday offerings for last Sunday, so the 10th, but we entered the deposit on the 11th. Then you do have the option to select a payee, but this is a deposit, so you wouldn't use a payee. They just state that as optional. Then at that point, you'll go to assets. We have restricted funds in our system, so we have an unrestricted, then we have each one of the restricted funds. Let's show this as just a deposit of money going into the general fund. So I select Central Trust Checking. Say that it's somebody gave $250 to our general fund. So we would select the asset account, type in the amount, select the income account, type in the amount. Then at that point, at the bottom, we can review our credits and debits. Excuse me just one second. Excuse me. Okay, so at the bottom, we can show our credits and debits. So with the checking account, to increase it, that's going to be a debit, $250. But with an income account, to increase it, that's going to be a credit of $250. So you debit an asset account to increase it, and you credit an income account to increase it. The credits and debits match on our account, on our transaction, and then we can just click save to finish the transaction. So if the credits did not match, then you'd have a difference, and then it wouldn't allow you to save the transaction. It'd give you an error message here at the top. So the transactions could not be created. The transaction could not be created because the line items must sum to zero. Expected credits total 249 to equal debits 250. So when there is a difference, it does leave a dollar amount down here. So the goal is basically for the amounts to be filled in, for the debits and credits to match, and for you to be able to click save, and then that creates your transactions. Now, here at the upper right of the screen, I have my date selected set to January. That's basically the month I was working with. But if I go to February, if I go to March, I'll be able to see all the transactions for March, and I could also use a quarter, or I could select a year, whichever time frame I wanted to select. There's also the option to select a date range. So if I just wanted to see 4 or 5 months for some reason, I could select that date range as well. So in looking at it right now, I could scroll down, I could see those line items, and this is the deposit I just created, $250. The ones that say deposit from batch, those were imported into the system. But if I needed to make changes, I could click on the transaction, open it up, and I can make changes. You can make changes up to the point that you do your very first, or I'm sorry, with this, you can make changes in this transaction up to the point that you reconcile the deposit. So you'll be able to make changes in the deposit. Let me talk about a couple other limiting factors with the software, a couple safeguards in the system, since I just talked about locking deposits. When it comes to checks, if you print a check, then you can no longer go back and make changes to that check. So there's one step before reconciling when it comes to checks. If you print it out, it won't allow you to make changes to the check. The other is when it comes to your account balances, if you reconcile, or when you do your first bank account reconciliation, that does lock your initial balances on your accounts. So you could still go in and enter in a journal entry, but you wouldn't be able to change the initial balance on the account once you've done your first bank account reconciliation. So there's 3 little things you want to kind of make note of when it comes to locking parts of the software. So, and they all center around bank account reconciliation. Okay, so we've shown adding a deposit here in Church360 Ledger, but there's going to be churches who are going to enter offerings into Church360 members and have those flow over to Church360 Ledger. So on another tab, I have Church360 members. I'm going to go to offerings here, and churches that have Church360 members go to offerings. So every church is going to have people who count the offerings. It might be the financial secretary, you might have an offerings counting team, but they're going to go into this view and they're going to enter offerings into the system. So these are imported offerings from Shepherd staff, but if I go to new batch here at the top, it'll allow me to select the date that I want to enter the offerings for. So this was Sunday's offerings. And then if there's an event in the system, I'll be able to select the event. Then I can click add, and then that will start the offering batch. So at that point, I just go through the offering entry process. So I can select a contributor, I can select a payment type. So it could be cash, check, electronic, which is going to be like EFT, ACH, debit, or credit card. And then it could also be a gift in kind. So our little truck here represents the gift in kind. And you can hover over these items to see what they're used for. So let's say that Dave and Sue gave cash to the general fund. So I'll go general fund, say that they gave $1,000 to the general fund, and then I can press enter. When you're entering your offerings, it can be done by mouse, or it can be done by keyboard. Now, if you use the keyboard, it's probably a little bit faster. I feel like it's faster. But some people are mouse people, some people are keyboard people, just depending on, I guess, hand-eye coordination and preference and things like that. So I could do 172 on the keyboard, and that's the 10 key on the right-hand side. Press enter, say that David and Shirley wrote a check, so I could press 2, then press enter. Check number 1234, press enter. I could type in the fund number. So my general fund doesn't have a number, but say they gave to Church at Large, I could type in 11 and press enter. Then, and actually, I need to stay within a certain range here. So general fund, building fund, and say that they gave $500 to the building fund, then I can press enter. And then it's really a rinse and repeat process at that point in time. So I want to use 4 giving funds so that I can show these giving funds in our deposit here in just a second. So I'm going to add one more offering record. So let's say this is 102, and they gave electronically to the youth fund, and then that is, I'm just going to say $75. And then if I down arrow, it'll allow me to select another fund, and I should have a mission fund, and I can type characters or type numbers and then say that's $25. So when you're entering it in, if you put more than one row on a contributor, it'll total that total those rows here on the right hand side. So the total amount given was $1,000 in cash, $500 was given by check, and $100 was given electronically. And then it'll give you the totals over here on the right hand side. The total batch is $1,600. General fund 100, 25, 75, 500. So when you're ready, you can print a batch report, and then every time, I'm going to add one more record to show this because I think this is important. So 103, enter, say it's cash, enter, general fund, enter, and $100. So when I press enter, if you look over here on the right hand side, it's going to say saved. Every time you press enter, it saves to the batch. And as soon as you're done saving your records, when you go over here to ledger, and I'm going to refresh the screen here. Then it's going to hand those deposits off. So it took a second for it to populate because I have all of those offerings that, all of those offering batches that are inside of Church360 members, but most people are not going to have all of these. They're going to have like 1, 2, or 3 up here. They're not going to have 400 something. So with that said, you can click on anywhere on the row where the little finger appears. So lots of times I'll click on deposit, or I'll click on the numbers over here. Just don't click on the X if you want to use this deposit. So you click on the row, that pulls it up, and then you'll be able to see the money that was given to each one of the funds. You'll also notice this little, I call it a bubble. So it's kind of rounded on the edges, but it lets you know how much was given to each one of the funds inside of Church360 members. It's also an indicator to let you know which income accounts you should select. So in looking at this over here, I have my unrestricted checking. That's going to be the money that was given to the general fund. And then from there, I could select the building fund for my restricted money. I could select the mission fund, and I could select the youth fund. So when I'm looking at the money over here, I need to decide over here on the left whether or not that money is restricted or unrestricted. So it was $1,700 total that was given, but only $1,100 of it was restricted. So I'm just going to change that to 1,100, and then it's going to drop 600 down here at the bottom. At that point, when I start filling in the dollar amounts, it'll start subtracting from down here. So mission fund was 25, and youth fund was 75. So now over here on the right hand side, even though it has the little bubble for the giving fund, you do need to select an income account. So it'll say building fund, income, offerings, funds. So you'll select building, and then this is general fund, so you'll select general, and then you'll select mission, and then you'll select youth. So it does have to have an income account, even though the little fund icon is here on the right hand side. So at that point, once again, this could be Sunday offerings. There we go. You'll just make sure the date is what you want the date to be. So then from there, so some people will use the date the offerings were given. Some people will use the date that the deposit went to the bank. It's an internal decision there. But then at that point, you can review the credits and debits, and then you can click Save since our debits and credits match. Then at that point, it will inject that deposit into the system. So in looking at it here, we'll scroll down just a little bit. And this is the Sunday offering batch that we just entered. So in looking at this, you'll kind of notice that it's kind of bluish in color. So that's one transaction. Then if I go up here, this one's bluish in color. And if I go down here, until you get to one that has more than one line item, you won't be able to see it, multiple line items with blue, but that's just a single line item, and that's blue. That's that single transaction. So now, let me go back up here to the top, and sometimes we'll get the question about if you remove a deposit, can you get that deposit back? If you use the X here at the top and you dismiss a deposit, once it's dismissed, then it's gone from this view. So you would have to then go into new transaction and go to deposit and just manually enter the deposit at that point in time. So these that flow over, especially for customers who are converting from Shepherd staff, sometimes they'll have a lot of them, but we'll just get rid of them and leave the ones that are needed at the top. Okay, so that is deposits and how to add a deposit into the system. So after deposits, let's take a look at, transfers. So I'm going to go a little out of order there. And the reason why I want to talk about transfers, I believe transfers is next. Oh, actually, let's talk about checks since that's my next slide. I do want to talk about transfers though, because there's going to be a couple questions about restricted funds and how to get the balances into restricted funds. But my next slide is checks, so we'll delve into checks. So with checks, checks allows users to print checks or record handwritten checks. So there's two types of checks. There's going to be handwritten checks, like you have the checkbook and you pull it out, write the check, tear the check out, and then give it to or mail it to whoever needs the check. And then there's also, I call them electronic checks because you are printing them from your computer. So lots of times people will buy check stock and then print onto those, onto that stock. And then there are three parts. So two parts go to the person who is supposed to receive the check, and one part stays with the church. So the church keeps a stub, and then the person who receives the check keeps a stub, and obviously they get the check to give to the bank so they can get their money. So these are going to be used for paying payroll and church bills. and you're able to print laser and inkjet checks. So depending on your type of printer, you may have a laser printer, you might have an inkjet printer, but you can print checks from Church360 Ledger. If you want to order checks, you can order checks from www.formsplusinc.com. Okay, so let's go back into Church360 Ledger, and here inside of the program, and you go to New Transaction, you'll notice that there's check and payment. I'll answer that question right now. When it comes to checks and payments, checks are going to be like, I guess computer generated or handwritten checks. Payment is kind of the direction we've gone, I guess, as the world, like this is larger than society. Everybody does these electronic payments. And when you pay a company, lots of times we're no longer mailing checks. We're going online and we're paying our bills and paying people and donating money. We're doing lots of things online, but these are all about payments and I guess having the church's money paid out to somebody else. And that's what a payment represents. And it could be through your bank, but it also could be you have a credit card payment, and that credit card payment, you go to Capital One or whoever they are, you go there and you make the payment on their website, then you would enter a payment into the system. So we're going to show checks first, then we're going to show payments, then we'll do transfers. So underneath checks, if you click check, this will allow you to enter in a memo. So let's say that we're going to pay a bill. So let's say that we're going to pay the electric bill. So memo, and this is March. So say this is going to be February's electric bill. You can select your electric company. If you know the check number, like if this is a handwritten check, you'll just type in the check number. Whoops, I'm in the wrong field. Okay, Ameren UE, check number 1234. So if you know the check number or it's a handwritten check, you'll just type in the check number. At that point, you'll select where the money's coming from. So we're going to pay this out of Central Trust Checking, or Central Trust Savings, Central Trust Checking. Then from there, we can select our electric account. So say the electric bill, I don't know, $575. $575. So you fill out both sides. You can review the check down here and see that everything looks correct. Then you can review the credits and debits. So a credit is going to decrease the checking account and a debit is going to increase an expense account. So at this point, we can go to save. That'll save our transaction. It'll put it into the print queue. And from there, we'll be able to manage the check. So I want to add in at least one more check. And let's see. So that check, let me switch here. Here we go. Okay, so with that check, I want to do a check that represents a payroll type check. So if I go to new transaction and I go to check and say that this is going to be a salary check, and we could say pastor's salary if we wanted to. Okay, so then you can select your payee and no Kent. So our pastor is Pastor Kent Williams in this database. From there, you'd select your checking account, and then on the left-hand side is where you would fill in payroll deductions. So maybe I'm going to change this. I'm just going to say this is salary, because when it comes to taxes, I know pastors don't pay some taxes. So I'm going to take pastor off here, and let's see. Let's do Timothy Coles. Okay, so then I'm on the left-hand side, we're going to select federal income tax, then we're going to select state income tax, then we're going to select Medicare, oops, and we're going to select Social Security. Okay, so all of those go on the left-hand side, and that's because these are going to be credits. And then on the right-hand side, this is going to be your salary account, and we'll use staff salary over here on the right-hand side. So let's say that the amount that Tim is going to receive, $652.48. Then liabilities, so federal is $95.10, state is 22, and you actually don't have to type the zeros on that if you don't want to. Then 51.67, then Social Security, and then Medicare is 1208. So the total is 833, and then I could just go over here and type in the 833 at that point in time. So if I scroll down to the bottom, we'll be able to see those credits and those debits. They balance out, so we're good to go. Then at that point, say this is going to be a check that we're just printing. The check stock is already or the check stock is pre-numbered. So we're just going to double check the numbers when we go through the printing process. So then at that point, I can click Save. And then that's going to move the check into the print queue. This green banner at the top hangs out for 5 seconds. So it used to hang out indefinitely, but it's for 5 seconds now. So if you don't get to click that print queue button at the top, then you can click right here and open up the print queue. At that point, you're once again at a Y in the road. So you'll be able to check the boxes here on the left-hand side, and you'll be able to state whether or not you just want to mark this check as printed or whether or not you want to print the check. Oh, that's a good question. I'm going to double back from this just a second. I received a question from Laura. Hello, Laura. Okay, so I'm going to go back to Tim's check. And the question Laura has, and I'll read that out loud, is why are the taxes being added to the check he received? Shouldn't they be set aside to submit to the government? And you are correct. So over here on the left, where it's like the check amount 652, that's his take-home pay. So that's the net. The staff salary is the gross, and then this 951, 95, 10, $22, 51.67, and 1208. All of that is being set aside in liability accounts to be paid out to the government. So this isn't the money being, well, I guess technically it is the money being taken from him, but it's not being taken in that way. It's being set aside, and then whenever the church pays Social Security and Medicare, and whenever they go to the website or mail the check out, then they'll just use these accounts over here on the right to offset the check or the payment that they're sending over to the government. So that's the reason why they're on the left-hand side. It's not really taking it from the check. It's just balancing the check out. Okay. Okay, so we'll go back to the print queue. And in the print queue, we have this check for Ameren UE. This represented a handwritten check. So I'll check the box, and then I'll just mark the check as printed. So anytime we handwrite a check, we're just marking the check as printed. And then that just takes it out of the queue. If you go back to the orange $ here at the top, then running down the left-hand side, there's going to be these little printed icons or these little printer icons, and they'll have a little slash through them. And that slash means that that check is unprinted. Then if there's no icon there, it means that, basically the transaction's ready to go to be reconciled. So This is a check that's already been printed. There's no little icon there. You're good to go. And once the transaction is reconciled, then it'll have a little lock by the transaction, meaning that it cannot be unlocked at that point. It cannot be changed at that point because it's locked. Okay, so we'll go back up here to the top. We'll go to print. Then at this point, we'll check the box for this transaction. We'll go to print. It'll take us to our print queue. And at that point, we'll review the transaction. And I have to warn everybody, I think I have a problem with my printer on this computer, but I'll give it a whirl. And if not, we'll switch over to another web browser. But at this point, you'll review the transaction. It'll have a stub at the top. The check, am I saying that correct? Reverse that. The check is at the top. The stub is in the middle, and then the stub is at the bottom. So once we review the check, this is check number 1, then we can click print. It'll bring up this window. Now, since we're entering this check in for the first time, we can state which check number, state our starting check number at this point in time. So most people don't have handwritten checks and computer generated checks or electronic checks. You just have one or the other. So when you print your first run of checks, it's going to store that information for you. So confirm, then it's going to apply that check number to it. And that's still not working quite right. Let me switch over to, there we go. Okay, so I had open another web browser just in case. So I can, and I'll make this bigger as well. 150. Okay, so then you can check the box, you can print, go to print, 4,500, confirm, then it will take you to this window where you can print it out at that point in time. So you click OK, it'll send it over to the printer, and mine's going out to the printer right now. But once it's done, you'll retrieve the checks from the printer. If everything looks good, then you mark that check as printed. If it doesn't look good, like say half of your checks printed, then you'll uncheck the ones that did not print and then check the ones that did print and mark those as printed. Then you rinse and repeat at that point in time. So in the sense of urgency for time, I only created a couple of checks, but you can create as many checks as you'd like, and you can print 10 checks at one time if you wanted to, or you can print 1 check at one time if you wanted to. So when you retrieve that check, if it looks good, then you'll mark it as printed and confirm, and then it'll take it out of the print queue. Then when you go back to your home screen, it'll have those checks as printed. Okay. And that's how you can enter in a check that represents like a payroll transaction. Okay, so from there, let's take a look at, and I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint slide, and I believe payments are next. So we're going to take a look at payments. Payments allow users to record online or electronic transactions. These transactions are limited to assets, liabilities, and expense account types. And examples are going to be any EFTs that you pay for utility bills. These could be payments for bank fees. Could be any payment that you make could be a payment. So let's go ahead and switch back to Church360 Ledger. We'll go to new transaction and we'll go to payment. So in my life, I make my electronic payments through my bank. So in most cases, every once in a while, I have to go to a website to make an electronic payment, but in most cases, I'm making it to the bank. So this same Amarin payment, I can select Amarin, I can select my unrestricted checking, and then I could type in my amount. So say that the other one was February, say this is January's bill here. So then go in here, and January is colder than February in most cases. So say this is only 400 something. So we'll say 412. Okay, so then we can still select our electric account here. The electric account is going to track all the money that we spent on electricity the whole year. So then at that point, we can review our credits and debits and click Save, and that will allow us to create that transaction. So it'll show up in our list of transactions, just like our February electric bill would show up in our list of transactions. So with payments, there's a little bit more flexibility since you're not printing out a document and giving it to somebody that's going to cash it. If you're in payments and say you make a mistake, you can January electric payment, electric bill. So, and say this was supposed to be, instead of 412, it was supposed to be 422. Then you can make this 422. So then at that point, you can save it. When you make a change to a transaction, you'll notice this little red triangle here. And this transaction has been edited. You can click on the triangle and you can see the change that was made. So it was 412, then it went to 422, an additional negative amount for your assets of $10 at that point. So the system is always keeping this running balance going, is what it's doing. Okay, so you can edit the transaction, make changes to it if it's not a check that you've printed out. You can void the transaction. You can also copy the transaction, and then you can make the transaction recurring as well. So this is an electric bill, and say, this is a pretty simple transaction, but if you had a complex transaction, you probably don't want to create it over and over and over again. So you can click copy, but if it's also something that's on a schedule, recurring makes a lot of sense. So you could name this the electric bill every single month, and then you could be like the first whatever day of whatever month it is. So it could be the first day of the month or 5th day of the month, and then you can save it, and then that creates your recurring transaction up here. So like if I go to the gear and go to recurring transaction, I'll have a list of recurring transactions, and I can click on those recurring transactions and make changes to them if needed. So and then those recurring transactions flow into our pending transactions with our deposits. So okay, so I'm going to go back to the gear here, and let's go back. Let's show transfers. Excuse me. So with transfers, transfers are used to represent electronic transfers between banks and to make line item corrections. So it's usually going to be those two scenarios when you're using a transfer. They only allow you to move money between similar account types. So when we're working with Church360 Ledger, when you go to new and you go to transfer, that's going to allow you to transfer the money from unrestricted to the building fund. So say unrestricted central trust savings, say that the building fund is supposed to have $50,000 in it, and then we can put the 50,000 here on the right. So we're crediting unrestricted central trust savings and we're debiting building fund restricted. When we save that, that's going to decrease central trust savings and it's going to increase our building fund. So here where it says home, we'll do central, and then I can do central trust savings here. And then I'll be able to see that $50,000 that I just put into it. Now, when you're drilling down into your accounts, it does show the breakdowns of those restricted funds if you're talking about assets. So I can go into building fund and then I can see the line items for all our building fund transactions. Okay. So, and then also if you've selected the wrong line item, you can transfer money from one expense account to the next expense account. So, and this could be the Social Security employer over here. So you can make a correction that way. Okay. So those are transfers. Transfers are pretty straightforward because whatever account type you select on the left, you've got to select the same account type here on the right-hand side. Okay, and it is, if my watch is correct, it is 1:50. So why don't we take a short 5-minute intermission, and 5-minute intermission, and then resume. Let me go to Google here, and I'm just going to pull up the Google timer here, and then we'll just resume in 5 minutes. Okay, I hope everybody has a wonderful intermission, and I will see everybody soon. Okay. Okay, perfect. So let's go back to Church360 Ledger. I hope everybody had a wonderful intermission there. Let me shrink that there. Okay. Okay, so when we left off, we were talking about transactions, and we're going to take a look at journal entries now. So journal entries allow users to record account balance corrections, interest earned, bank fees, etc. They can utilize all 4 account types. So when you're working with journal entries, there's no limitations. And sometimes people use them for different scenarios. So voiding transactions, I spoke about that just a little bit earlier. But in looking at our system here, we're going to go to Home, and I'm going to go to New Transaction and go to Journal Entries. And I have a few journal entries that I'd like to show. I also want to, I'm going to click here, and I'm going to go back to our debits and credits chart. So I want to show the debits and credits chart. When you're working with journal entries, this chart is like a little lifesaver, basically. So I'm going to switch back here, and so under account, you can select the account. You'll notice the layout's a little bit different. You still have memo, payee, dollar amount, but it's more vertical. So like you select checking account here, then you select another account below there, and then you'd enter in the appropriate debits and credits. So the journal entry that I want to do, I want to start out with bank interest. So here's Central Trust Checking, that's our bank account. And then we can enter in interest income. And then we know that debiting is going to increase a checking account. So say our interest was 13 cents. Then for the credit, we would credit the income account for 13 cents. So those two do balance, so we know that we can save our transaction, but that's just the way that the credits and debits work. So, and this might also be why some people use deposits for their bank interest instead of going in and doing journal entries, because if they do a deposit, then they don't have to figure out which item is a credit and which item is a debit. So we're going to call this February's bank interest. Click Save, and then that adds that transaction into the system. Okay, so that's how you enter in bank interest. Let's show bank fees. So if I go to New Transaction, go to Journal Entries, and this could be bank fees for February. Okay, so once again, this would include the bank account, and I don't know if I used Central Trust Savings last time or checking, but say there's bank fees for the checking account, then and it looks like I don't have a bank fees expense account. So and this happens to people at times. So I'm going to close the journal entry. If you don't have an account in the system and you need one, you do have to close the transaction, go to the chart of accounts, go to expenses, and then add in the account. So I'm going to say new account, and this one's going to be bank fees. And I'm going to leave off the account number, but I'm going to say the balance is 0. So then when I click submit, I can drag this account into its proper location. So these are bank fees. We'll put it under, let's see, let's put it under miscellaneous up here. And we'll just drag it into the proper location. Then from there, you'll scroll down and you'll save changes and confirm. So now that that account is in the system, then we'll scroll up and we'll go to New Transactions, go to Journal Entry. Then we can once again say bank fees. Bank fees, we'll do for February, all caps, at least the first letters capitalized. So then Central Trust Checking, and our bank fees account is now in there. This is going to decrease our checking account, so bank fees $7.99 and bank fees $7.99. So the checking account is going to be decreased $7.99, but the bank fees is going to be increased $7.99. And I'm going to switch over here. So the credit will decrease our asset account, but the debit will increase our expense account. So, okay. So at that point, we'll just save our transaction and our journal entry will now be in the system. Okay, so that's a couple of journal entries. If there's a complex journal entry you'd like me to show, feel free to post that in the question box and I'll work through that example. But let's go ahead and let's take a look at reports. So we've covered the other items. So like here, and we've talked about, let me move that over. We talked about voiding transactions, or at least I showed voiding transactions. Oh, I did not show voiding transactions. So we're going to talk about voiding transactions right now. So I think I mentioned it briefly, but I didn't actually void a transaction. I'm pretty sure I created a recurring transaction. So with voiding transactions, these cancel the effects of a transaction. So and it actually puts a reversal in the system. So this doesn't eradicate the transaction. Everything in Church360 Ledger is a running balance. So when you enter in a transaction and save it, that transaction's in there. If you adjust it, it creates an adjusting transaction in the background. And if you void it, it creates that void in the background so that you can see this kind of change in this change log inside the software. So it creates a hidden reversing transaction and groups the two transactions together. This cannot be undone. So if you void it, it's voided. You just create a new transaction at that point in time. So intermission and quiz will be we've done intermission, so we'll head to quiz next. So so then let's show voiding. So if we go to the home screen and inside of here we find there's a transaction that we've entered that we really didn't need, or we made a mistake on it. So say we've got these two transactions. We've got Ameren Electric here and we've got Ameren Electric here, and we did not mean to pay them twice. So say that we need to void that transaction. So we could click on the check here, then we could scroll down and go to void, and then you'll just confirm your void. Now when you void that transaction, it'll disappear from this view, but if you go up to the reports icon and you go to general ledger, which is almost like a perfect transition there. So if you go to general ledger and we'll scroll down just a little bit, you'll notice how it has these, I guess that's like a pink or kind of like a reddish color there. It's going to have the reversal in there. So we had the one check and then we reversed it. So it just, we have the line items and then it just reverses them. So everything's always in there and there's always these little reversals going on. So inside the software, to access your reports, you're going to go to the little piece of paper here or the spiral notebook here, and then you'll select the report that you want to view. So there's general ledger, income and expense, chart of accounts, and balance sheet. So if I go to the general ledger report, it pulls up this report that is used for finding transactions. And the report actually shows all of the line items. And across the top, you'll notice how it's type, check number, payee. There's little hyperlinks here. Then there's account, memo, and amount. If you click on the little triangle, that will allow you to filter your transactions by these options. So in looking at it, like we have all, if we unclick all, then just all the transactions disappear. But say we just wanted to see checks, I can check the box for check. And then these are all the line items associated with your checks. You can also say you wanted to just see the ones related to one checking account. You could say, well, the Central Trust Savings or the checking account, and it will show those items. Now, inside the general ledger, it does show the voided transactions. So those are in there. If you're wanting to exclude those from the report, you do have the option to export the information to Excel. And then once it's in Excel, it'll look very similar to this. There we go. And we can open with Excel. Give it just a second, and Excel should pop up on one of my monitors, and it looks like it's this one. Perfect. Okay. Then once it's in Excel, you can enable editing, and it's going to let you know if the transaction was voided, and you could delete those transactions if you didn't want to include them on the report. But really, it's for history and for tracking purposes. Okay. So that's the export to Excel. You can also print this report as well. So when you go to print, you can select the printer that you want, click OK, and then it will send it off to the printer. So inside this view, you can make these changes. Now, it does remember the changes that you make. So if you go in and you group your payees or you group by account, it just saves those changes for you. So. And then you can revert them if you'd like. So just depending on what type of information you're looking for. So that's the general ledger report. After the general ledger report, there's the statement of income and expense. This report is going to compare income versus expense. On the left-hand side, it does group by the categories that I guess whoever configured the chart of accounts set those up. So it'll group by those. Then you can use the little triangles to collapse these areas. And in working with those triangles, the thought process behind it is that you may want to craft this report for certain audiences. So lots of times chart of accounts can get extremely long. Like you can have a super long chart of accounts, but if you have a certain audience, that super long chart of accounts may not be the best bet. And you can collapse these categories, and then that'll give you a different take on the data. So it, even though the categories are there, it's a lot easier to read when you kind of have it narrowed down like this. So strictly up to the user and I guess the audience for what they wanted to do. So this is a statement of income and expense. You can select the month that you'd like, and then that will that'll reveal those numbers here on the left-hand side. Okay, so in looking at this report does compare your budgets versus your actuals, and it compares your percent of budget versus the amount remaining. So you can kind of get a picture of how you're trending with this report. There are people at times who will say, hey, I really like this report, but I want to be able to see the annual amount with the monthly amount. And if that's the case, then you'll have like February here. You can export that to Excel. Open. Give that a second, and then I'm just going to kind of resize that a little bit. Then you can switch this to a year version, then export that to Excel. Okay, give that just a second. Then you can this is the month version. So I'm just going to pin these to the side here. So then you could enable editing. Okay, and then when you're working with these reports, they did merge the top 3 rows across left to right there. So you can unmerge those. You can do the same here for unmerging. But then at that point, whichever fields you want to include, you can copy from left over to right. So this is the budget here for all of 2019. So say you don't want the percentage or the remaining, you could delete those columns. And since these were both exported with the same column selected, the same column collapsed, you could then copy these 2 over. So you can right-click copy, and then you could paste those in there. And then everything would line up. So it does allow that type of action. It takes a little bit of work, but not too much, and it would just depend on what type of information you want to see on your report. Let's see. Yes. Okay. So I'm going to read. There was a couple questions that popped in, and I think they're both similar. So I'm going to read both of them, and if they're different, then I'll make sure to answer them separately. So hello, Laura. Laura asked, is there a way to get an income and expense report for just the budgeted items without showing restricted accounts at all? And then Julie asked, which I think is the same, some of my restricted accounts, let me read it. Let me read it all the way through before I decide that it's the same. Some of the restricted accounts don't show in the income and expense accounts. Do you know why? Yes. Okay, so I'm going to answer Laura's questions first. So with Laura's question, inside of Church360 members, the way that it's designed with the restricted funds, income and expense from restricted money does show on these reports. Currently, there's not a way inside the software to exclude restricted money from showing on the statement of income and expense. You can go in here and let me close these 2. You can go in here, and when you extract the, let's see, we have funds and we have education and ministry. We have miscellaneous. So we don't have restricted funds on ours, but I'm going to go to the gear and go to chart of accounts and go down to the income. And let's say that these 3 are restricted. So new category, restricted funds. And then I can drag this up here. Keep going. Okay. So then I can have a category within a category. Save, confirm. Then when I export my report to Excel, close that. Okay, so go to the gear, go to the book, go to income and expense. Then there's restricted funds there. So when I export it to Excel, I'm going to do that automatically. Okay. Okay, so when I export it to Excel, all of the restricted funds are grouped together, and I can delete those restricted funds. Oh, I have to enable it first, but I can delete those restricted funds from the report. And then once it's deleted, it does affect the formula, but the formula is pretty straightforward to fix. You just delete the ones that don't have a proper reference, and then you can copy it over. So it's definitely not ideal, but currently right now, when it comes to the restricted funds, you can't just eliminate them prior to printing. They have to be modified in the Microsoft Excel spreadsheet before reporting. Okay. So the other question is from Trisha, and she says, oh, Laura, the first one was from Laura, the second one's from Julie. And some of my restricted accounts don't show in income and expense. Do you know why? My guess, and I don't know without looking at the site definitively, but kind of like my gut feeling on that is, I'd say don't save there, is when you set up the chart of accounts that there aren't income and expense accounts for the restricted funds in the chart of accounts. That's my guess. But if you'd like, we can get together and connect to your computer and dig into it. Either myself or one of the techs can take a look at the chart of accounts and figure out what's going on. Okay. Okay, general ledger, income and expense, chart of accounts. And then the chart of accounts report and the balance sheet report are very similar. Like the name, the column headers, they're exactly the same on these two reports. The reasons for the reports being different is, I think, twofold. One is every financial software has to have a balance sheet, and the balance sheet compares our assets versus our liabilities. Now, not every church uses a balance sheet report. So I talked to lots of churches. They're like, hey, we don't use the balance sheet. We really focus on the statement of income and expense. So I think that's also why we have a chart of accounts report that's just a different take on the balance sheet. But the balance sheet is going to give you a total of all your assets, compare that to your liabilities, and give you this total down here at the bottom. So the balance sheet is one of those reports that is extremely valuable. Just sometimes we don't know how valuable it is. And the reason being that it's so valuable because it's comparing what you have versus what you owe. It's kind of like a I guess a barometer or a litmus test, or it's something to kind of give you an understanding of how well the church's finances are doing. So if you owe more than you have, that's problematic. So looking at the balance sheet gives you that glimpse of what's going on with your finances. So every church really should be using the balance sheet, but I definitely understand if you're not, because you may not be working with liabilities, which then doesn't give you a good picture of what's going on between your fund balances, and you're kind of just like, why do I even need this report? Oh, it's only showing a total of my assets. So, but something to think about and consider. So the balance sheet report shows assets versus liabilities, but the chart of accounts report, that report shows every single account inside of the system. So in looking at that, you can see your restricted funds, and you can see your income accounts, and you scroll down far enough, you can see your expense accounts. So you're seeing all of the accounts in the system. You're also seeing the starting balances, ending balances. For the auditors who need to take a look at it, they can see all the debits and credits and see that they balance. There's also the change plus and minus and change percent, so you can kind of see how things are going up and down, and just get a better picture of how your finances are doing. Okay, so from there, I do want to show a few other reports, and of course I want to show the bank account reconciliation. So within the software, there's going to be these reports. I call them canned reports because they're already kind of pre-crafted and set up. But there's a couple other reports that sometimes people, I guess, just don't recognize as being reports. So there's the budgets view. And when you go to budgets, it has the option to export here at the top. So you can export that to Excel and send that to different people, and they can use that as a report of how the budgets have been allocated for the year. There's also the payees view, and with payees, you can filter here at the top, Amarin. You can go to history, and the history link allows you to see each line item that paid out to this payee throughout the year. So you can set a date range, and it'll change your items down here, but once you have that, you can use that to help create your 1099 or something like that if you need to present that information. The software doesn't natively do 1099s, but we can provide the information that you would need for the 1099. So that's another report in the software. It has a print and Excel button, export to Excel button. There's also the transactions view. So this Omni bar at the top can be used to find an account, and then once you find that account, you can see how much money was brought into or spent out of that account during the time period you have selected. So you can go to home and then type in a different account. So we'll say Youth Fund Restricted, and we'll set our date range to 2019. So far this year, the Youth Fund has received $75. So. And then, of course, that could be exported and printed. Lots of times I see this done with income accounts. So sometimes people will want to see how much money was brought into one of the income accounts, and you could select that income account and print out the information. So I think, yeah. So you may notice, like this says 7292, 7,292, and then I go to 2019, there's no transactions, and it says 7,292. Well, the reason why that's happening, it goes back to what I was saying about the fiscal years. So if I go to the gear and I go to fiscal years, I can click the lock, and then that locks those years and resets those income and expense accounts. So you're going to want to, if you've had the software for a while, you're just going to want to make sure to lock your fiscal years. Okay, and that is the different reports inside the software. If there's a report that you'd like to see, feel free to post that in the question box, and I'll show you a report. Okay, from there, the next thing to show is the bank account reconciliation. So with the bank account reconciliation, you'll enter in all your transactions. You'll print out like check registers and deposit registers to make sure everything's in the system. You'll receive your bank statement from your bank, and then you'll go into your Central Trust, and I think mine is Central Trust Checking. And I'm going to reconcile for the month of January. So when you get into this area where you're getting ready to reconcile, you'll set the date range for the transactions that you want to reconcile. So it could be a month, it could be that you need to go a wider range. So it could be February sometime, but you'll just make sure that whatever range you need to show the transactions that you need, you'll set here at the upper right. So at that point, you'll just click on reconcile, and then it will allow you to reconcile. Now, when you go into the reconciliation view, it'll have this, I think it's kind of like a pine green, like it's a kind of a darker green there. And you can enter in the statement end date. So this is the date of the this is the date of the newest transaction in your reconciliation. So ours is going to be the 31st. From there, you'll enter in the starting balance. Okay. Then you'll go in and you'll enter in the ending balance. Okay. Then, once you've entered in the starting balance and the ending balance, it's going to calculate a statement difference. That's the difference between these two numbers. Once you start selecting transactions, it's going to give you a selected difference. And then it's going to tell you the difference between the two. Is that correct? That's an awful lot. Maybe it is. 19. This. What the difference one digit can make. That's a huge difference. Okay, so at that point you start checking off each one of the transactions on your bank statement. And as you're going through and you're checking off the transactions, it's going to give you a selected difference, and it's going to show you the checks and deposits. Those should match what you have on your bank statement. So most bank statements will have total deposits and total checks. If you have journal entries, there may be other transactions on there as well. As you're selecting the transactions, I'll verify the amounts match what's on my bank statement, because if those dollar amounts don't match, then when I get all the way to the end, then my bank statement is not going to balance. Kind of like this one. Let me click cancel here just 1 second, and reconcile. Starting balance is, and I think I have my starting balance and ending balance reversed. Okay. Okay, those look pretty good. Okay, so this is a dummy reconciliation. So it should match. I think I reversed the starting and ending balance when I was looking at my numbers. So when you get close to the end, the difference should start approaching 0. And if everything works, then the difference is 0, and you'll click Save. Now, when working in this view, you only want to click Cancel if you want to start over. So if I get all the way to the end and I'm off, and I'm like, hey, I need to take a look at some transactions, you just click on the orange $sign, and it will save your place. Then go in, make your change, then go back to checking. There we go. Then at that point, you can go back to your reconciliation. It'll remember what you have selected. You'll select that transaction, and you'll click Save at that point. Hello, Linda. Linda asked, does the statement date need to be changed? The statement date does not need to be changed. I think that's one of those things that they added in, but probably it's something you don't have to change. If you don't change the statement date, it just shows you the transactions that are, let me go back here and go to checking, and it just shows you the transactions that you've filtered here at the upper right of your screen. So you don't even need to change that date at all. Hello, Tricia. Trisha asked, if you have transactions that haven't cleared in the current month, do you save or wait until they clear next month? If you have transactions that don't clear. Oh, that's a good question. Yes, ma'am. Okay, so in looking at or in thinking about that, when you run your bank statement, that's a really good question. When you run your bank statement or when you do your bank account reconciliation, you're just looking at usually a 30-day period, 31-day period. So if you have items that didn't clear, they don't apply to this process. So like when I go to reconcile, the only thing that I'm selecting in this view are items that cleared the bank. So your assertion, do you wait till next month to clear those? Yes. So when those finally clear the bank, you'll do them, you'll reconcile them in that reconciliation. So if they don't clear till, like this is March and they don't clear till April, then you reconcile them in April. Oh, you're welcome, Linda. Okay, so once the reconciliation is zeroed, so the off by is 0, then we'll click Save. Then at that point, you'll see all the items are locked. And I would also make note for new users, the first reconciliation does lock your initial balances. So you won't be able to go back and change those beginning balances once you've done the reconciliation. Okay, so after that, there's another question that lots of people ask, and it will be, how do I print a bank account reconciliation report? And that's where the event log comes into play. So if you go to reports and you go to event log, then it'll take actually we got to go to March since that's where we did all this. But you'll set your date range for the events that you want to take a look at. And then once you've reconciled, there'll be a reconciliation line in the event log. You'll click on that line. You'll be able to, at that point, print out your bank account reconciliation report and store it with your bank statement. So you'll be good to go at that point. Okay, so that's the information that I have for this session. If there's outstanding questions, please feel free to post those in the question box. And we're just going to transition into our quiz. So okay, there we go. Okay, so I'll launch the quiz. There we go. Okay, so true or false, handwritten checks will appear in the start that over. Handwritten checks will appear in the print queue along with checks to be printed. True or false? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results. So we had an 80-20 split. So 80% said true and 20% said false. So I'm going to hide the results and share the answer. And the answer is true. All checks are sent to the print queue. To remove a handwritten check from the print queue, check the box to the left of the check and click the Mark as Printed button. Okay. Question number 2. When creating a journal entry, applying a credit to a bank account will decrease the account balance. True or false? This one's a little tough. Okay, perfect. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results. Once again, an 80-20 split. 80% said true and 20% said false. So I'm going to hide the results and share the answer. And the answer is true. A credit to an asset will decrease the account balance while a debit will increase the account balance. Question number 3. True or false? The chart of accounts report can be used as a trial balance report. Okay, here we go. I'm going to close the poll and share the results. Third time, 80% said true and 20% said false. I'm going to hide the results and share the answer, and the answer is true. This report shows the total credits and debits for each account. For specific sums of totals, the reports can be exported to Excel and modified. That is true. Okay, question number 4. True or false? You are working with the bank account reconciliation and you find out that you need to enter a transaction. What should you do? A, click the save button. B, click the cancel button. Or C, click the orange $sign button. A, B, or C. Okay. I'm going to close the poll and share the results. So we had 101% of the people vote. We had 17% say click the save button. We have 17% say click the cancel button. And we had 67% say click the orange $sign. So we'll hide the results and share the answer. And the answer is C. Click the home button, orange $sign. This will take you out of the reconciliation and not delete your work. Once the transaction has been entered, just reopen the reconciliation and continue clearing transaction. Only click cancel if you want to start over. Okay, and then the fifth and final quiz question. There we go. There we go. Okay, question number 5. To print a reconciliation report, go to the event log. Okay, and I'm going to close the poll and share the results. So we had an 83-17 split this time. So I'm going to hide the results and share the answer. And the answer is true. A bank account reconciliation report can be printed from the event log. Okay, do you have any questions? If you do, feel free to post those questions in the question box. While we're kind of wrapping up, I do want to thank everybody for attending today's webinar. We hope you enjoyed this session. If you have any questions further outside of the webinar, I'll hang on for a few moments here. Of course, you can give us a call at 1-800-346-6120, and you can shoot us an email at support@cts.cph.org. Oh, thanks, Linda. I really appreciate it. Oh, thanks, Julie. Okay, well, it doesn't look like there's any questions, so I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar. If you run into anything, please let us know. Okay, I hope everybody has a wonderful afternoon. For Jim Bowling, this is Rod Kiles. We are signing off.